When we last left Egypt, the pyramids rose to greatness, then declined with the last pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, Shepsefkaf, who built a mastaba instead of a pyramid. Now in this video, I'll briefly outline the remaining pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. Then I'll discuss the reasons why scholars believe the kingdom collapsed. So picking up right where we left off, even though Shepsefkaf built a mastaba, pyramids were still built after his reign, but most were closer to 150 feet, rather than closer to the 481 feet of Khufu's Great Pyramid of Giza. And today, these later pyramids look more like dirt and loose rock mounds rather than glorious tombs. So smaller pyramids are one characteristic that define these final two dynasties of the Old Kingdom, which are the 5th and 6th dynasties. Also during this time, a new god became prominent, the sun god Ra. It apparently started in the 4th dynasty, with Khufu's lesser-known son, Djedefre, who called himself the son of Ra. Notice the R-E at the end of his name. This was one way the pharaohs paid homage to the sun god. And sometimes you'll see the names written with a R-A instead of an R-E, but both mean the same thing. So if Djedefre was called the son of Ra, does that mean his dad Khufu, the pharaoh who built the largest pyramid in Egypt, considered himself or was considered by his subjects to be Ra? Well, probably not. Most likely the pharaohs were showing their direct connection with the sun god through propaganda, just like they did with Horus, as I discussed in my previous videos. What is clear, however, is that most of the pharaohs that immediately followed Khufu started paying homage to the sun god in a more palpable way. And this praise really takes hold with the pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. The first pharaoh of this new dynasty was Userkaf. He made the first concrete expression in this shift of reverence by building the first solar temple in Abu Sir. He named it Nekhen-Ra, which means Ra's stronghold. Userkaf was Menkare's first cousin, who married Menkare's daughter. And I guess this was enough of a deviation from that preferred custom of primogeniture to qualify a new dynasty. That and apparently these 5th dynasty pharaohs preferred solar temples and smaller pyramids over insanely large pyramids. And as you might have noticed, Userkaf did not have the R-A or R-E at the end of his name like Djedefre and a few others of the 4th dynasty did. But it was because of Userkaf's outwardly recognition of the solar deity that the next 5 pharaohs all had that R-E or R-A at the end of their names, and they all followed in the same path as Userkaf by building their smaller pyramids and solar temples in Abu Sir. Solar temples were walled stone enclosures with a symbolic mound at its center. There was also an altar in front of the mound for sacrifices to Ra. These temples were thought to bring the pharaoh closer to the realm of the divine. Userkaf's temple had a squat obelisk in it, and a boat for Ra's use at the south edge. The obelisk represents a ray of sunlight and has a gilded benben stone at the tip that looks like a smaller pyramid. The tip glowed in the sun and therefore looked like a little sun itself. And the boat at the south end was there to transport the soul of the pharaoh into the underworld, as it hitches a ride on the sun during the day and goes into the underworld at night. These solar temples were pretty cool, but what historians love even more is what came next. The last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty was Unas, and he was another innovator like Userkaf, but instead of building solar temples, he built a modest-sized pyramid that was highly decorated inside, and it has been described as nothing less than a microcosm of the universe. The most valuable feature of this ornate pyramid to historians are the pyramid texts, written on the inside of his tomb. These pyramid texts are the earliest surviving body of religious literature from ancient Egypt, and the only large corpus of inscriptions from the Old Kingdom. And lucky for us, from Unas' reign forward, pyramid texts would become more common in the pharaoh's tombs. Scholars have noticed that these texts seem to be organized into 3 stages to help the pharaoh on his journey into the next world. First, some of the texts decorating the walls would cast spells that would protect the body inside the tomb from being disturbed. Next, some spells would make sure his spirit would safely make it west, on a solar boat, into the underworld. And finally, some spells would ensure that the pharaoh was accepted into the next world and resurrected in the afterlife. This trend of pyramid texts would be embraced by the 6th dynasty too, starting with the first pharaoh, Teti. Now, Teti was not related to Unas. Unas died without a son to inherit the throne, and Teti, who was a commoner, somehow seized power and secured his legitimacy by marrying Unas' daughter. A move that seems similar to how Userkaf started the 5th dynasty, but this time it was a commoner rather than a cousin. Probably for the best if we're considering the health of his children. It's believed Teti was assassinated, possibly by disgruntled royal relatives, and his successor, Userkara, was either a short-lived usurper or a regent for Teti's son. Either way, Teti's son, Pepi I, ruled for about 40 years. Then his son, Merenre, ruled for about a decade. Then his son, Pepi II, ruled for 94 years. Then the kingdom collapsed. So, what happened? There seems to be three factors that historians highlight when discussing why the Old Kingdom collapsed: pyramid building, powerful nomarchs, and an ineffective final pharaoh. Let's start by looking at these first two together, because pyramid building seems to have contributed to creating these powerful nomarchs. If we look at the Old Kingdom as a whole, we see its rise and fall in the height of its tombs. They rise from sandpits to mastabas to step pyramids to these huge precise pyramids. Then they start to fall, with smaller pyramids, more mastabas, and some solar temples. None of the scholars I've read seem to dispute this arc in the rise and fall of the Old Kingdom's pharaohs' tombs. But what is questioned is why. Why did they stop building these grand pyramids? Herodotus, the 5th century BCE Greek historian, can possibly give us some insight here. He says that the people hated Khufu and Khafre because they shut down all the temples and sanctuaries to build their great tombs. The people seem to have reached their breaking point. After nearly 2 centuries of these huge public building projects, the people and the governors of these 42 nomes were tired of putting all their time and resources into building these over-the-top tombs. So Khafre's son Menkaure, possibly being aware of this pressure, and maybe he was worrying about a potential coup, shrewdly tried to cool all the hotheads in the country by opening everything back up and by building a pyramid that was half the size of his father's and his grandfather's. And then Menkaure's son Shepsefkaf said, "I don't want any of that noise, I'm building a mastaba." And of course, I don't know what he actually said, but what we do know is that he did build a mastaba instead of a pyramid. So we know pyramid building did decline, and it may be because of a disgruntled population, and the pharaohs of this era were just trying to navigate around this. So historians do consider this take by Herodotus, but not as absolute truth, rather as something to consider when trying to assess what actually happened. Whatever the reason, this decline did happen, and it set the stage for creating the next factor that contributed to collapse. The king's viziers and regional governors, called nomarchs, did become much richer and more powerful from this point forward into the 5th and 6th dynasties. Viziers to the pharaoh like Kajemni and Mereruka are known to have had immense authority, wealth, and were buried in glorious mastabas. One of my favorites is a local magistrate, Pepi II of Mir. He listed all of his titles on an entire wall in his tomb. There's 25 titles here, so pause if you want to read all of them. The last one is the best. It's a great self-aggrandizing list, and is evidence that more people who had the means wanted to flaunt what they had. What seems to have happened was the royal family of the 5th dynasty, the family that built the solar temples, tried to distance themselves from the business of government and started hiring more non-royal professionals to do the job of governing. Maybe to seem more inclusive, or to prevent a rebellion by distancing themselves from Khufu and Khafre, or maybe they just wanted to spend more time worshipping Ra in their solar temples. Whatever the reason, it first resulted in bigger government, and as time went on, more responsibility was delegated to officials in their own nomes. So these regional nomarchs, who inherited a system of attaining and delivering resources to build the pharaoh's grand tombs, suddenly found themselves in an era of smaller pyramid building, and therefore had fewer resources to procure for their monarch, while at the same time having more control over their territory. With this extra power and resources, they began calling themselves the great overlords of their provinces, and they started to build their own glorious tombs so they could also be preserved and resurrected. So the height of the Pyramid Age set a precedent for tombs in the afterlife that more people wanted. And when they finally had the means, they followed that precedent as far as their power and resources would allow. As construction for the monarchy slowed down, and these nomarchs gained more power, the final pharaoh of the Old Kingdom, Pepi II, seemed to facilitate the collapse by being ineffective and living too long. Right before Pepi II became pharaoh, Nubian chiefs were amassing power to the south of Egypt. Decisive leadership was needed to maintain Egyptian authority in Nubia. However, during this time, the pharaoh, Mer-En-Ra, died when his heir, Pepi II, was only 6 years old. So for a short while, the government was headed by a regency council of Pepi's mother and uncle. And during this transition, Egypt lost control of trade and resources in these Nubian regions, and its authority in the area receded through the duration of Pepi II's reign. The economy was further weakened by prolonged periods of low Nile flooding that affected the agricultural production throughout the state. This in turn precipitated abandonment of some areas, like basalt quarries that supplied Egypt's building projects. On top of this economic hardship, innovation seems to have stalled. If we look at Pepi II's tomb, it wasn't a unique expression of a great king, like Khufu, Userkaf, or Unas. Rather, his tomb is a copy of Suhure's complex at Abu Sir. So it seems to appear that Pepi II may have just been going through the motions during his reign. Whatever he was doing, his reign is perceived as being weak, ineffective, and crippled by inaction. And as I mentioned earlier, it lasted too long, and therefore this ineffective leadership lasted too long. Again, I said it lasted for 94 years. He is often cited as being the longest reigning monarch in history, even though some historians think he reigned closer to 60-something years, but that's still a long time. This longevity might be great for a strong, inspiring leader, but it's bad for a weak one. His nomarchs probably loved it though, because the longer he reigned, the more powerful they became. And his longevity also created a succession problem. As Toby Wilkinson put it, not only did the king see 10 viziers come and go, but he outlived so many of his heirs that the royal family struggled to find a single candidate who could command widespread support. Egypt was set on an unstoppable course toward political fragmentation. So with these economic and trade issues, stalled innovation, powerful nomarchs, and succession problems, when Pepi II finally died, unity dissolved and the kingdom collapsed. I've seen several sources that date this collapse sometime between 2125 and 2181 BCE. So whatever the exact date is, all of them fall into the 22nd century BCE, which makes this century perfect for this project and for building your effective timeline. Egypt will enter a dark age for a while, but it will re-emerge in the next century, and we'll discuss all that in my next video. So that's it, our 11th date. 22nd century BCE, Egypt's old kingdom collapses. Only 42 dates to go. In our next video, we're back in Egypt and we'll see them pull themselves back together, at least for a few more centuries. If you have any questions or know a lot already, in the comment section, please post anything you think is essential to understanding this century or this topic. If you're adding new information, please cite your sources. I'll be monitoring what's going on, and in my conclusion videos for this project, I'll highlight how we've expanded its historiography and list any questions that seem to be left unanswered. At that point, we'll have a stronger foundation for my next project and all future projects. And of course, if you're an expert and you want to share your knowledge to help guide us, please feel free to join the conversation. Or if you're interested, I'd love to interview you and post it right here. So contact me. If you just found me for the first time and are curious what this is all about, go check out my intro videos to both this project and this channel. And as always, subscribe, like, donate some money to keep this show going, click the notification so you know when the next video is up, and I'll see you then.